So what we have seen till now, basically, the features of operating systems and some of the the organization in the previous class. Then know the various things which were possible, and I told you at the end that there is always something like no interrupt. So when you press anything from the keyboard, no, there is a interrupt which is generated, and internally, there is some like interrupt service routine which is getting executed. Right now, inside the system, inside the main memory, there would be interrupt service routines, a set of interrupt service routines for different interrupts, and that's how the system is working. So operating system by and large is nothing but like a set of interrupts which are internally executed, right? And over and above that, there are various types of interrupts through which the execution modes would also be changed, right? So there would be kernel mode transition, and wherein there will be internal data structures of kernel itself, and for the user also there would be some data structure. So stack basically would be used for the users, and in that way, things are operating. Just give me 1 minute. So now, let's say this is an example of interrupt timeline, wherein when CPU is doing some execution, right? At that point of time, if some IO activity is coming up, then in that case, there will be a IO device transition from idle state to the transferring state. So, but at that point of time, because we are having multi-programming environment system, the process which is getting executed by the CPU, that will continue in the execution mode. And when the transfer is finished, when the IO transfer is finished, it will interrupt to the CPU with its status, right? And CPU will then take the control and will analyze it, and then it will again continue with the execution part. So in that way, the transfer as well as the CPU under execution would be managed with the help of interrupts. Okay. So, but yes, at the end, the IO device is supposed to send an interrupt to the CPU, indicating the status that what has been done and how much transfer is done and what to what device it has been done and so on. Okay. So after IO starts, control returns to the user program only once, only upon the IO completion. So IO activity is going on in parallel, as well as the CPU execution is also going in parallel. Right. So wait instruction idles the CPU until the next interrupt. So there is an instruction which is inside the CPU, which is is sending a signal to the CPU that what is supposed to be done. Right. And wait for which again there will be a wait loop which for I mean it will keep on waiting to get the input from the device, as well as for different type of activities. So wait loop, then there is a sleep also which is there. So different type of system calls would be there through which the system is operating. Right, and all the system call again, just to revise you, that all the system calls basically are part of the kernel. Okay, so you can use it, but you cannot modify it. Right, so users are make use of those type of system call, like opening a file, closing a file. We normally do in the C programming, right? So when you try to say opening a file, or create a file, open a file, close a file, read the point, locate the pointer at some place, and all such type of things we normally do. So basically, for each of the activity, it is managed. So after IO starts, right? After the IO starts, control returns to the user program without waiting for IO completion. That is what we have seen in the previous graph. That CPU will continue executing, and IO will also continue executing while transferring the data. Okay. So system call basically requests to the operating system to allow users to wait for the IO completion, and that's how the system. Operating system is making use of a lot of system calls for that. And then there is a device status table also, which is managed, and which is supposed to be referred by the operating system to see whether the things are proper or not. So each of these transfer will internally have to inform the operating system that what type of device it is, what is the address at which the data is supposed to be transferred, what amount of data is supposed to be transferred, and what is the information, whether the paper is available in the printer or not. That also is supposed to be known to the operating systems. Then and then it will send the data to print or anything of that type. So OS indexes into the IO device table, right? So there would be a device table which will be there with the devices to determine the device status and to modify table entry to include the interrupts. Okay, so in that way, there is a very much synchronization which is required between the operating system as well as the devices. And no, for which to handle the hardware of the device, will always be a device driver, which will be responsible to, smoothly glue with the operating systems of different types. Okay. So again, this is related to the storage of different types. So I think this is already known to us. So we'll just keep that. But yes, 10 to the power 3 is kilobyte. 10 to the power 10 to the power 3 kilobyte is equal to 1 megabyte, right? And 10 to the power 3 megabyte is equal to 1 gigabyte. 10 to the power 3 gigabyte equal to 1 terabyte, and 10 to the power 3 terabyte equal to 1 petabyte, exabyte, yottabyte, exabyte, and so on, right? In that way, the memory is actually there. But yes, internally when the data is actually transferred, even though we feel that no, there is a bit and byte and other things, but when the data is transferred, it is in the form of word. Okay, so word size basically will determine what would be the amount of data which will be transferred at a stretch, and for which there would be some lines which would be required. So we have already undergone some address lines, data lines, control lines, and so on, right? Sometimes address bus, data bus, control bus. Yes, in that way. So when I say that my data bus is of 64 bit, in that case a 64-bit word would be directly fetched from the main memory and will be submitted to the CPU, because the register size of CPU is of 64 bit. That's how the processors as of now. If we say 32-bit processor, 64-bit processor, that means what? It means that you can directly, you can at a stretch, the lines are available to store that much word size, and it can process it inside the CPU in that manner. Earlier it was 8-bit, 16-bit, then 32-bit, then 64-bit, and so on. So recently, most popular the hardware are of 64-bit and 128-bit. Okay. So internally, when the memory data transfer is taking place, it will be in the form of words and not in the form of bytes. In case if the word size is equal to bytes, 1 byte, then there will be byte transfer, otherwise not. Okay. So next, in connection to that, we have seen a couple of types of memories, right? So main memory basically stores is only large storage media that the CPU can access directly. So there are two types of, not two types, but then it can be a random access memory, which is we call it as RAM, and there is another type of memory which we call it as ROM. But main memory basically refers to RAM only, right? And typically, what is the characteristic of that is basically it is volatile. So whenever when we switch off the power, then the memory contents goes off. Okay, and secondary storage as such is non-volatile, and when we require a lot of data to be stored, then we normally store it into the secondary memory, which is non-volatile. Hard disk basically will be storing the information in the different tracks which are there, and which is divided into sectors of 512 bytes. Okay, in that way, the memory, secondary memory is actually available, and for each of this type of devices, like secondary storage devices, there is always going to be a device controller, right? So in the case of hard disk drive, there will be a disk controller, and which will be basically responsible for interaction between the operating system and the device. Okay, recently we do have some solid state devices also, which is something like USB drives, right, and flash memories also, so which are faster than the hard disk, but they are non-volatile, right? So they will also store the information, and even if you remove it from the system, your data is going to get preserved in your USBs. Okay, various technologies are available for that, and they are becoming more popular. So recently, if you see, you are out of, we don't know now what is your CD drive, right? It is no more required, because earlier in intermediate technology was there, but no USBs, after the invent of USBs with various speeds and other things, this laser technology is no more required inside the system as an hardware, right? So over the course of time, lot of technological changes are coming up, and because of which, again, the operating systems are supposed to be made appropriate. Okay, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So next is storage systems hierarchy. Basically, we know that there is a diagram which is there with me, and storage systems are basically organized in the hierarchy of speed, cost, and volatility, right? And looking into the caching part, copying information into faster storage systems, right? Main memory can be viewed as a cache for secondary storage. So at least we can say that main memory is quite faster compared to what is secondary storage. Why? Because the access time to locate your head onto the hard disk surface is more compared to reading the content from your RAM, right? So we can say that your main memory is like a cache to the secondary memory, But then there is high speed memory also, which is available for access with the CPU, which we normally call it as caching. Right. So again, no different types of levels of cache would be possible. There could be n number of levels which could be. There is no restriction that no only L1 cache and L2 cache would be there. As such, there could be n number of levels which could be there. But because the cost of that memory is very much high, because hardware would be required for that, and no doubt it is becoming cheaper nowadays. So we will see sooner or later that high speed and a high amount of cache would be present inside your CPUs, in your laptops also, right? So that is going to be seen in the next future, because the VLSI technology is becoming cheaper, and the quantum of data which could be stored or could be processed, within 1 inch by 1 inch sort of, if the wafer is there, then lot of things could be there within that. Millions and millions of transistors could be occupied in that small 1 inch wafer, right? So because of that, because the IC technologies are becoming cheaper, we would see that the hardware of caching also would be improved, and sooner or later we'll see a lot of capacity in the cache also is available. So by that, what will happen is your speed of access to the memory would be faster. So instead of going for content from the secondary storage, what will happen is you will store a lot of information into the main memory, and lot of information again would be kept inside the buffer of the cache, so that CPU can directly access the memory and will be able to process without latency. Right. So that sort of things are going to be in the future, as well as it is already there. But because the cost is still high in the memory part, caching is restricted to somewhere around 128 sort of thing. Right. So device driver as such for each of these would be required to manage the IO devices, and it provides an interface between the controller and the kernel. Kernel is nothing but the operating system. Okay. And controller as such would be an embedded software, embedded system, which will be actually making use of the hardware. So when you transfer the data basically from the kernel to the controller, right? Controller will store the information, will manage everything, and then will send the commands to the drive. Through that driver to the actual hardware, so that the head movement and other things can take place. Okay, in that way. If I give you the example of printer, if the dot matrix printer is there, then it has to point to the head position, and then it can start the printing. It cannot start printing from the reverse direction, right? In that way. So normally, we see that lot of synchronization would be done at the controller level with the actual hardware and with the operating system also. Again, operating systems would be of different types. It could be Linux also, it could be Windows also, and some other OS also. So it has to also make sure, the device manufacturer also has to make sure that the appropriate module for appropriate operating system is prepared. So it is the responsibility of the manufacturer to provide the interface with the different types of kernels. Okay, so this is the hierarchy actually which is there, and hard disk somewhere is there in between, and there are a few more disks which are slower in speed. So optical disk and magnetic tapes are also there. But yes, if we start from the hard disk, then the USB is your main memory, your cache, and then the registers are the way in which the access by the CPU would be done. So CPU is directly connected with the registers. So you have to bring the content from the secondary memory to the registers, then it can process it. So if it is 64-bit processor, 8 bytes of data would be fetched and would be available from the main memory to the registers, or from the hard disk to the main memory, and then to the cache, and then to the register, so that it can process little faster. Okay, so in that way, so this is the hierarchy of in terms of speed also, and as well as the storage also. So storage, in terms of storage, if I say registers are less in numbers, right, because it is to be inside the CPU, so that is still less in number, but then gradually it is increasing. So sooner or later, again, we will see multi-cores and other type of things which are available in the market, and that will still increase, and more amount of storage area networks also would be available in the, so that the shared memory concept would be available on board, right? So that will improve upon the performance, but at the same time, when the infrastructure is increasing in such a way, at the same time your operating system also should be capable enough, should be modified enough, so that it can make use of those hardware. Otherwise, what will happen is, I told you in the previous class, that if you are making use of XP, Windows XP, and if you are executing Windows XP on multi-core machine, you will not get the benefit which is expected, because it is designed to execute on a single core only. But recently we are having multi-core, so clustered systems are available, so that it can make use of the storage area networks, and a lot of things, network operating system and other type of operating systems needs to come into picture. At the same time, it will also require the communication also to be in place, right? So TCP/IP protocol should be part of your operating system. Right. So all these integrations are supposed to be done by the manufacturers of the operating system as well. Okay. Anyway, coming to the caching part, important principle performed at many levels in the computer, in the hardware, in the operating system, in the software, and all such things, right? And information is used, copied from slower to the faster storage temporarily. So all these things are temporary. When you power off, everything goes off, right? So that's all volatile. And faster storage, basically, we call it as cache, and checked first to determine if the information is there. So when you try to access any of the module which is present on the secondary storage or from the main memory, what it does is CPU will first check inside the cache whether it is present inside the cache. If it is present inside the cache, it will fetch that information and submit it to the CPU, right? If it is, then it will do it. If not, data has to be in this in the memory. Are you with me? Can you hear me?
Sir, you were not audible. Like,
Hello?
for 10 seconds.
10 seconds. No, okay. So in case if the data is available in the cache, it will be accessing it from the cache. And in case if the data is not available in the cache, then it has to bring it from the hard disk or from the main memory, so that no, it remains inside the cache, and CPU can then access the information from the cache to the register, bring it into the register, and then execute it. That's what I was saying. Okay, so when you are accessing, so a lot of synchronization here also would be required in case if the sufficient memory is not available inside the cache. Then what it has to do is, suppose it has to flush the cache, it has to make some space inside the memory, and it has to swap the content from one location to the other, bring in the actual content which is required. All this type of activity would be required to be done by the operating system. So memory management modules comes into the picture, and it has to make sure that the sufficient memory is available, so that if not the entire program, but at least partial program is, if it is also present inside the main memory, then also it can execute, and it will start executing those instructions, right? Even the data also partially could be present. So there are various things. I mean, when we talk of memory management, when we look into the details of it, you will come to realize that there are many things which are there. So page replacement algorithms and other things are going to be there, whether it could be in the form of pages or it could be in the form of segments, what. So all this paging and segmentation and other things we'll see when we look into those in details, right? So just by bringing the information into the cache, a lot of things are required to be performed by the operating system. That's what I was targeting. Okay, so cache smaller than the storage being cached. So everything will not be cached into the memory. Only the partial amount of information will only be required to be brought inside the cache, and then so that no CPU can execute and continue executing. Right. So cache management is an important design problem, and the cache size and replacement policies also comes into picture. So which part of the memory should be thrown out or should be told that you please move out, and so that you can create the space for the high priority processes to be in the main memory or inside the cache. So in that way, a lot of replacement policies and the algorithms also be coming up. Yes, there is another type of direct memory access, which is direct memory access, which is used for high-speed I/O device transfer, and I mean the information at close to the memory speeds, right? So it will transmit the information so that the memory latency is as small as possible. So device controller again would be required. So DMA controller, can say DMA controllers are there. 8257. 8257 is the IC which is actually responsible for this DMA transfer. You might have studied this DMA control transfer in the organization course or DLD course, right? So device controller transfers block of data from buffer storage directly to the main memory without CPU intervention, right? So it will initially do the synchronization, that what amount of data from which place to which place, and then it will send the IO signal that okay, the device is ready. It will start transferring the information. As and when the IO transfer is finished, it will the device is supposed to send an interrupt signal to the CPU that okay, my data transfer is finished. Now you can take the control with all the statistics and all the status. Okay, so in that way, the device controllers are designed to transfer the data for direct memory access. Only one interrupt is generated per block rather than the one interrupt per byte. So just imagine, instead of saying one block, I would then say that once the synchronization is done, No, the entire block here, it is like if it is 512 byte sector, right? So 512 byte sector would be transferred from the secondary storage to the another secondary storage. Like let's say if you say control C, control V. If you are doing control C, control V, then the transfer is from secondary to secondary, right? Secondary storage to secondary storage, hard disk to hard disk, right? So in that case, no, CPU should not be disturbed. So what it does, it informs the DMA controller, and DMA controller will then take the control and will see that whether the sufficient space is available or not. If there is a sufficient space available, then it will initiate the transfer, the amount of data which is supposed to be transferred, and every byte is supposed to be checked again that whether the actual transfer is successful or not. So whatever you are transferring, no, at the end there will be some checksum mechanism or CRC mechanism which you might have studied as network also, right? So every transfer will again be verified that whether the transfer was successful or not, and at the end, no, there will be an interrupt signal which will be sent to the CPU. CPU will diagnose it and will check and verify whether the transfer was successfully done or not in that way. So internally there is an interrupt mechanism which is going to be there. So again, this was the same thing which I have told you, that no device will send the through DMA transfer. So initially all the instructions would be submitted by the CPU to the device through the DMA controller. DMA controller will then transfer the data from the device to the to the secondary storage if it is, right? And CPU then free as a CPU is then free to do. This when this book was printed, no, this was the situation, but things have changed, right? So most systems have special purpose processors as well. So what is the meaning of this is, no, for dedicated no things, like if you want to have VGA graphics to be available on the screen, no, there was a Sound Blaster card which was made available in the form of hardware. So specialized processors were designed, and no, they were able to take care of everything. But nowadays what has happened is that no such type of things are now on board. So on the motherboard itself, no, the hardware is integrated, right? And the instruction set as such, no, is made to be of complex type, right? So instead of having the basic instruction set, now the thing are right. So complex instruction set computing. So your machines, the laptops that you are using, your desktop that you are using, they are following the complex instruction set computing. What will happen with that is basically your hardware will increase, right? To store the content into JPEG format, when you click on the camera of the laptop or anything, no, it will by default store the information into JPEG format. So what that for which no, there is a hardware which is integrated inside it. That's how no, the hardware is also expanding, and lot of features are integrated on board. So this is just an example, right? Just similar would be the case for audios and other things. Yes, for having high-end graphics, no, we are now having NVIDIA graphics card also available, right? So similar is this case. Now, sooner or later, what we can see is that no such type of graphics accelerators will be on board, right? So it is already there as such in the current systems, but then an enhanced version of no the graphics adapters would be available on the motherboard itself, right? So those things are supposed to be of as part of the hardware, but at the same time, no, you again require the operating system for any change on the use of those hardwares to be in the best possible manner. Then you have to also change the operating system. So that's how no the patching of various operating systems are coming up. Periodically updates are available and so on, because they are improving upon their own standards. The designers of the operating systems, no, they are working seriously on that, and so that no the users are given the best performance. Next is no the multiprocessor computers are coming up in a big way, and they are also sometimes known as no parallel systems or tightly coupled systems and so on. The advantage of that would be like no, the objective is to increase the throughput. What is throughput is that in 1 unit of time, let's say in 1 second of time, how many processes have been successfully executed, right? So that is the throughput, right? So in 1 unit of one second of time, let's say in 1 second of time, what is the actual outcome, right? If you don't have the balance of IO as well as the CPU bound processes, then no, you may see that no, the throughput will go down. If there is a perfect balance as per the requirement of the operating system, then your throughput will increase. Also, no, the economy of scale and increased reliability, right? These are the parameters which are the important parameters on the current operating systems are looking at, right? Increased reliability basically means what? The graceful degradation or fault tolerance. In case if the data is stored on the hard disk, in this case, in case if the data is stored on the hard disk, and if that data is not actually made available to the CPU for execution in the right manner, or in case if it is stored, a 10 number is stored inside the secondary memory, and while reaching into this cache memory, if it is becoming something different, then whether the system is supposed to execute those things? Answer is no, right? So we need to make sure that the fault tolerance is supposed to be handled very carefully. Also, at the same time, when you try to read the information from the secondary memory, it should be available, right? It should be available. In case if that data is not available, then what? So even though the CPU generating the address, the information is stored on the hard disk. If that address, your physical address, I would say now the physical address, that physical address is actually not finding that particular information. In that case, there is a faulty data which is generated by the CPU. In fact, the system should be reliable, right? The objective is that the data should be made available from different sources. In case if only one hard disk is there, if that hard disk fails, then your data is lost. So you can have multiple hard disk also onto the system, and so that your data at any point of time should be available. If not from the one source, it should fetch the information from the another source. Obviously, this will degrade the throughput because your IO activity will increase, right? So there are those things are of different types which should be discussed separately. I'm just giving you the idea here. So there are two types of processors architecture which are available. One is symmetric multiprocessing and another is asymmetric multiprocessing. So in the case of symmetric multiprocessor, each processor performs all tasks, right? So there will be symmetric CPUs which will be connected together and they will do independently all the jobs. The only thing is that you'll have to distribute the data appropriately, and the code will remain the same. The code will remain the same with each of the processors, and they will execute on different data sets. And at the end, there will be some consolidation of data consolidation of outcome, which is done by each of the CPU, by master CPU, something like that. Okay, so that is what is going to be there. In asymmetric multiprocessing, each processor is a specific task. So separate task could be given, and each of these processors can work independently, and then it can collect the information. So different types of architectures are available to process different type of data and so on, right? So this is an example of symmetric multiprocessing architecture where different CPUs would be there, heterogeneous CPUs would be there, almost similar CPUs would be there, and each of them would be having its own register set, it will be having its own cache and so on, but then the memory would be shared. So it will be more biased towards the sharing of memory, right? The similar would be the case with the asymmetric, but in the case of asymmetric, what will happen is there will be a lot of communication which would be required for one data requirement from the other, right? So in case if you require the data which is not available with you, it will have to pass through the interconnection networks, your TCP/IP network, and will fetch the information from the different source, bring it to your machine, and then it can execute. So that will take a lot of time, right? So in the case of symmetric multiprocessing architecture, your system's performance would be better compared to asymmetric multiprocessing systems. Yes, the current scenario is multi-chip and multi-core, right? Systems containing all chips and chassis containing multiple separate systems. So this is what is I told you in the previous diagram itself. This is symmetric multiprocessing. So your multi-core systems would be of this type, and it's more designed towards the bias of shared memory concept, right? And at the same time, there would be storage area networks and other things which are available for networks of such type. So when you say that I want to prepare a cluster, then you imagine that your machine can be part of the cluster. Similarly, your friend's machine, which is of similar type, can also be part of your cluster. So all this grouped together could be part of your cluster. So that is what is clustered systems. Like multiprocessor systems, it is there, but multiple systems working together, and basically there will be some requirement. That requirement would be usually sharing storage via the storage area network, right? Obviously, storage area network would be again making use of the TCP/IP protocol. The transfer of data from one location to the other would be there. At the same time, there could be some common storage area storage space, where you can have the replica of your storage, right? So RAID systems as such, RAID levels are there for memory, so that the replica of each of the disk would be there, and basically to improve upon the reliability of the data. right? So in case if one of the mirror is lost, then the second, from different source, it can get the, because it will get the data, so that reliability would be there. The objective here would be to have the replication, right? So more amount of replication would be there, but then at the same time, you will consume your memory in duplicating your data. So most convenient way of duplicating your data would be having a replication factor of 3, right? Replication factor of 3. And at the same time, it has to have the consistency also. So in case if one of the things goes into failure, it can fetch the information from the other replicas. So it provides high availability, and there are two things which are required. One is asymmetric and symmetric clustering, right? And I mean, this is what we have already seen. So some clusters are for high performance computing, and applications must be written to use parallelization. Now see, every application cannot be parallelized. Understand? Every application cannot be parallelized, and because there will be some dependencies. So in case if you are having the dependency, those type of applications cannot be parallelized. So you have to resolve the dependencies, and then you can submit it to the high computing machines for execution, right? So those things are there, and for parallelization also there are a couple of algorithms which would be required for synchronization mechanisms, right? So various things are there within the parallelization. It is not, but yes, whatever you can do with the parallelized system, the same thing you can even test on your Linux platform also. So the library what for parallelization, whatever is there, it is designed for single core also, it is designed for multi-core also, and it is designed for the same thing. You can use it for your high performance computing machines also, right? So however, the performance would be poor in that case, because there is no parallelization and single core. If you are executing parallelization on your machine, because you are making use of only single machine, obviously there will be no parallelization, right? But yes, if you are executing it on multiple cores and then distributing the data, then things would be possible. Okay, so appropriately you need to write the code so that collaboratively they will work together, and then they will outcome, and then the consolidation work would be required to be done by some master machine or master process. So the parent process can create the child process. In another words, I can say parent process will create the child process, and children's would be doing computation out of the available data set, and so on. Number of things you can do. Okay, so this is how the parallelization and other things would be there. And next is your cluster system. So various computers would be connected, and to all of these computers, there would be a common storage area network where the storage is present, and they are all interconnected through the TCP/IP. But then when you are requiring the data from one machine to the other machine, then either it can fetch the information from the storage area network, or maybe when there is a computer and the data is stored there itself, it has to bring that information, or maybe through the interconnection networks. Yes, so that will take away some time, right? That will take away some time. But yes, the communication networks are so much powerful nowadays that the systems have improved upon a lot of things. So just to give you an idea of what the current systems are, let's say NVIDIA DGX A100 is a wonderful artificial intelligence hardware provided by NVIDIA, right? And for which there will be some master workstation which will be required, like Tyron server. But see, if you don't change your switches, will you get the performance which is expected? Your 10 Gbps networks switches, even though it is on fiber optic, may not be able to give you the performance that you are expecting, because the communication delay would, right? So 100 Gbps, 1000 Gbps internet speed would be required on the switches also. So only when I say that two computers are communicating, lot of things are coming up. It needs to be empowered. They should be minimized. So all such type of things are also to be seen when you look into the clustered systems. Okay, then comes the concept of the different types of operating systems, right? So when I say the different types of operating systems, then what? See, the first thing which came up into existence was the batch operating system, right? And batch operating system basically was used in the 1970s to 80s, right? But see, still no, I can say that it is not obsolete. Why? Because no, if you see the big data analytics modules, no, the way in which it is processing, in case if you are not processing the data in real time, then obviously no, it is going to be in the form of batches only. So the concept of batch operating system, even though as far as the execution is concerned, no, even though it was in 1970s and 80s, but still no, it is present inside the in a way like no, when we transfer the data from one node to the another node, to the master node and to the slave node and so on. No, the data would be transferred in the form of batches only. So that concept is still present. So it is a single computer where no, everyone was given the access. It was like no, a single machine was there and everyone can access it. And no, users, what they used to do is no, they were having jobs like no, one user is having job J1, another user job J2, J3, J4 and so on. And those jobs were submitted to the CPU for execution, right? So each user used to go away after some time, and no, after some time they will come and collect the results. That was the concept. Okay, so those were the things which were there. And now in that case, if job J1 is there, let's say job 1 is there, it is going to take a lot of time. I will come back to the previous slide. In case if job J1 is going to take a lot of time, the other jobs will stall, right? They all will be delayed. And no, if any job requires IO, then also there is a stall, right? So if job is taking a lot of CPU time, then also it will stall. If job is requiring some IO, then also there will be a stall. So CPU is likely to remain idle, no, when there is some IO activity which is going on. So that was the wastage of CPU, in fact, no, in the earlier days. So because of which no, this development has taken place, right? CPU cannot be kept idle. So what will happen no, when the CPU is idle is basically no, it will result into low throughput, right? It will result into low throughput and more starvation. Are you getting me? So because starvation is more, no, unnecessarily the other jobs, no, J2, J3, J4 and all these things, no, they will get delayed, right? Unnecessarily because of some IO activity, and ultimately throughput is less. So efficiency was very less. In such type of operating systems, efficiency was very less. Nowadays, we don't use batch operating system except at the mainframe machines, understand? And it is also not interactive. So those are the things which are there. But yes, no, when we design or when we submit the jobs for to the operating system, no, it has to have some balance of different types of processes, right? One could be your CPU bound processes, another could be your IO bound processes. If there is a perfect match, then no, we can improve upon the performance of the system. But we cannot say that no, only CPU bound processes would be there inside the system, because it is possible that no, there will be some requirement of IO. In case if there is a scanf function which needs to be executed, it will wait for the keyboard entry. It will wait for the keyboard entry so that no, it can continue. So all the jobs no, may not be having only CPU. It may not be like only IO, but it has to have a mix match of CPU bound as well as IO bound processes. Are you with me, all of you? Hello, and are you with me, all of you?
Hello, sir.
Please.
Hello, sir.
Yes. Are you
Sir,
with me? Are you able to hear me?
हाँ sir.
ठीक है. Actually, we have not covered much. Only the basics are there, so not an issue. But gradually, no, I will slow down. Noted your point. But what I was telling was that it is not interactive. Your performance would be degraded. Your efficiency is less. Your throughput would be low. You will have more starvation because of no different types of IO activities which could be there, and all such stuff which I was talking of, right? So if one job is going for IO, other jobs will have to stall. At the same time, if one job is going to take CPU time, other jobs will also will have to stall. I mean, we'll have to wait. Stall means nothing but wait, right? So multiple jobs, no, could be of present inside the system, and no, depending upon the type of processes which are in execution, no, things may get delayed and resulting into throughput, less throughput. So the concept of multi-programming came into existence. Right, because batch processing was not performing better, multi-programming came up, and it is nothing but it is an extension of batch operating system, right? So a single user cannot keep CPU and IO devices busy at all times, Right. So what will happen is that if there is some IO activity which is required for the job, then what it will do is it will tell the system that you remain outside and let the CPU be free, so that the other jobs could go ahead for their execution. So that was the concept which came up, which was not there with the batch operating system. So, but still it is an extension of batch operating system. So when any job requires IO, CPU can take other jobs and process it. That is the concept behind it. Okay, and no, CPU is used efficiently, and CPU will always be busy in job execution. By doing this, what will happen is CPU will always be busy in job execution. So multi-programming organizes jobs, and jobs will have what? It will have the code as well as data both. Right? Only code segment may not work. It will have to process the data also. It will have to process the data also. So CPU always has one to execute, either code or either IO or either data, something like that. Okay. So subset of total jobs in system is kept in memory. So what is the meaning of that is whatsoever the jobs are there, at least some set of jobs would be inside the main memory, depending upon the availability of the memory. Okay, and one job is selected and run via job scheduling. So job scheduling algorithms comes into picture. Okay, so what is job scheduling algorithm is, let's say if there is some CPU which is some job which is in the execution mode, so can it be occupied for lifetime? Answer to this would be no. Here comes the role of schedule. So there is some. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you
Yes,
hear
sir,
me?
but
Please reply.
yes, sir, but you were not
Yeah,
audible a few
in
seconds
between.
ago.
Yeah, I know. Because of that only I am saying. I kept mum at that point of time. So the point is, job scheduling algorithm will come into picture, and this job scheduling algorithm, what it will do is it will not allow the CPU to be occupied by one job for lifetime. So what it will do is it will restrict the job to be executed for some time quantum, and after that there will be some preemption, right? So I'm coining the word preemption. Okay, preemption means what? One job which is inside the CPU will be told to move out, and the other jobs which are waiting for their turn to come into the CPU will be given a chance to come into the CPU and use it. Right, that's how the job scheduling algorithm. This is something like a round robin algorithm. So we'll see those algorithms in detail with some numericals and other things. I mean, very nicely. Once this first chapter is finished, we'll jump into the process management, where I will take a lot of numericals. Understand? Okay. So, but then I'm just giving you the idea. Okay. So when it has to wait, operating switches to another job. So if there is some IO activity which is required to be done, so in that case, what it will do is it will say that no, you go out, do your IO activity, finish it up. Let my CPU be free so that I can continue with the other jobs. So OS switching will do to the another jobs, right? So that where no the job scheduling algorithm will come into picture, will decide that which process out of the available processes should be given a chance. So there could be some high priority process. So priority based scheduling is also possible, right? Shortest job first can also be there. First come first out policy could also be there. So there are lots of algorithms which are going to be there as part of process management. Okay, when we talk of all these things, then came the concept of multitasking, right? Multitasking is nothing but it is an extension of multi-programming, right? Instead of taking one job for execution and finishing it up, it allows other jobs too for execution. So no, the time bounding came into existence with with this multitasking sort of thing. Sometimes time sharing is also known as multitasking, right? And I mean, multiple jobs will be multiplexed in time shared basis. So if given to you 1 second, your 1 second would be divided into multiple slots, right? Multiple slots of, let's say, 0.2 microsecond or 2 microsecond sort of thing. And then that 2 microsecond could be given to one job. Another 2 microsecond could be given to another job. So that is what is multiplexing, right? So multiple jobs will be multiplexed in time shared basis, right? So that the concept of multitasking, and it will be interactive also. Interactive will be required. It can be done. So in the previous batch or multi-programming, there is nothing like preemption. In the case like multi-programming, core multi-programming, there was no preemption. But with the help of multitasking coming into picture, those things were possible. So CPU, what will happen is CPU will be told to pull out for other processes in some multiplexed manner, like round robin, with some constraints, obviously, right? So that's how things are going to be there. And by doing this, what will happen is that CPU will not be idle. CPU will not be idle. Understand, some books use multi-programming and multitasking as same, but by and large, multi-programming covers multitasking. All right. So some books use multi-programming and multitasking as same, but by and large, multi-programming covers multitasking. Okay. So that was the concept behind the multitasking operating systems. Multi-programming, we have seen that instead of having only one job, now because of availability of memory, multiple jobs could be present. And then the job scheduling algorithms will come into picture and other things. Okay. Next is your multiprocessing, right? Multiprocessing. So multiprocessing is like you will have multiple CPUs in the same computer, right? And each of these computers would be executing multiple jobs. Like job J1 could be given on core computer 1, core 1, job J2 on core 2, job J3 on core 3, and so on. So that is multiprocessing operating system. So many jobs can be processed simultaneously. Okay, many jobs can be processed simultaneously. So what is going to happen is we will have parallelism into the picture. So parallelism is improved in job processing, and it is similar to having multiple computers. Just like like multiple computers are there, because of having multiple cores, each cores are going to execute multiple jobs in parallel. Your parallelism is going to increase, but and the advantage of this is it is less costly, right? Because of the availability of huge hardware available in the single machines, this is possible. So that concept is known as multiprocessing. And you need not buy everything. No, you need not buy everything, because memory is going to be shared, CPU is going to be shared, so everything will be shared as such. So cost is less and efficiency is more. What will happen is your cost is reduced and efficiency is going to increase, and at the same time throughput will also be improved. So a lot of benefits are available with multiprocessing. And multiprocessing is again nothing but we are going to make use of multi-programming, multitasking, batch, everything together at the base level, right? So those things are there as such. So if one CPU fails, other CPUs will coordinate for remaining jobs. Okay, other CPUs will coordinate for remaining jobs. And whereas with the single CPU, what could be the situation? Whole thing will come down to a breakdown. Whole thing comes to a breakdown, right? So recently computer is multi-core. We know that it is 2 core, 4 core, 8 core, right? So all of these processors are having huge capacity to process, because lots of benefits are there. Reliability is increased, your throughput is improved, your efficiency is high, cost is less, everything is shared, right? So all of these benefits could be made available inside the multiprocessing environment. And multiprocessing can be combined again with multi-programming also. Right, multiprocessing can be combined with multi-programming also. So each CPU can be used individually. One CPU for batch processing, one CPU for multi-programming, one CPU for doing other jobs, and so on, multitasking, and so on. So all these features could be made available in this multi-processing environment. Okay, and internally, a lot of things would be required to be done at the OS level also. So I've just told you about what types of operating systems could be there. And there could be multiple jobs which could be there inside the memory along with the operating system. Operating system cannot be outside the main memory. Operating system it should always be present inside the system, inside the main memory. When I say system, it is inside the main memory, so that the modules which are supposed to be executed for different jobs to be executed should be present inside the operating system, inside the main memory, right? Otherwise, if you keep operating system itself outside, then how will the scheduling take place? How will the synchronization take place? How will the memory management take place? File management take place? So operating system will always be there. The core part of the operating system, which we call it as kernel, should always be inside the main memory. Okay, so this is one example. As such, in the previous days, 512 memory was the capacity, and only some jobs could be were able to get loaded into the main memory. But nowadays we are having huge main memory. It runs into GBs, so that is not an issue. So multi-programming is now scaled up in a very big way with the advent of multiple CPUs and multi-processing capabilities which are there. No, I obviously know the operating system has also is supposed to be changed so that lots of jobs could be executed in parallel of different types, right? Resulting into what? Resulting into throughput, more throughput. We want more throughput, efficiency, and everything, right? So that is the main core objective of the operating system. Next is no, this is anyway related to other things, but yes, the other type of operating system which I should like to coin up here is your real-time operating systems. So real-time operating systems are something like jobs needs to be finished with deadlines, right? So the example of that, if I can coin up here, is something like if you are dropping a missile from the aircraft, right, or from the defense aircrafts, right? So in that case, if you don't drop it at real time at the exact moment, then what will happen is that missile can drop at some different place, right, resulting into some other damages. So instead, we want certain things to be done at real time, and for which there will be embedded systems which will be there, which we normally call it as real-time operating systems, wherein the things are supposed to be finished in stipulated deadlines only, right? If you don't, then there will be some other problems, right? So that type of things are there. So yes, coming back to this slide, interrupt-driven operations would be there. It would be hardware as well as software. Hardware interrupts interrupt by one of the devices, and software interrupts would be divide by 0, and then request for operating system services like opening a file, closing a file, and so on. The other processes, other process problems include infinite loop. You need to come out of the infinite loop so that the other processes would be allowed to enter into the CPU, right, for execution. So in case if there is an infinite loop, so that we call it a deadlock, right? So deadlock prevention mechanism techniques and other things are there, which we'll be seeing when we look into the synchronization chapter. Okay, so processes modify each other or the operating system so that it can come out from the infinite loop. But in fact, we should try to avoid the infinite loop. And there are interrupts through which you can do that also. Control C, normally we try to see. Control Alt Delete also is there, so that it can end the task. We normally do the end task, right, operation. So what is that? Basically, it is an interrupt. Internally, it is an interrupt, which is basically saying that, okay, what are the tasks which are there? We'll look into it, and then you can finish up those tasks. Or maybe you can say that, you are killing that process. Killing that process. Again, to kill that process, there is a system call which is available inside the operating system. That kill will remove the entire data structure as well as whatever is loaded into the main memory for that particular process, will free up everything for that particular process, so that now the resources are available and it can continue safely from the available pool of processes to continue the execution. Okay, so next is only one slide here, and then we will stop. Okay, so dual mode operations allow operating system itself and other system components. So there are two modes in which the operating system operates. One is the user mode, another is the kernel mode. So when you are opening an application or typing anything onto the screen, it is nothing but the user mode. But when you send anything or making use of the services of the operating system, it goes into the kernel mode and then operates. So, however, the user is not aware of what is happening in the background, but there is a continuous switching which is done from the user mode to the kernel mode. When you say execute this problem, then it will go into the kernel mode and will execute your process, right? Unless and until you don't submit the command to execute, let's say a.out. So in that case, a.out will do the switching from the user mode to the kernel mode. Till the a.out is typed and everything, it is user mode. When the shell is there, it is in the user mode. So mode bit internally is there, which is in the form of hardware available inside the system. So which provides ability to distinguish when system is running user mode or user code or the kernel code, right? Because kernel is having its own data structure. Kernel stack is different compared to user stack. Understand, right? So some instructions designated as privileged only executable in the kernel mode. Right, so there are some certain instructions which you cannot execute at the user mode. It has to go down at the kernel level, and kernel can only execute. So kernel level privileges would be required for the user if you want to do that. Let's say if you want to change the password inside the Unix operating system, then normally no, it should not be permitted, right? So what it internally does is it gets the access of the kernel data structure. It enhances its own privilege, user privilege, and with that kernel level privilege, no, it allows you to edit the password in the etc password file. Otherwise, it is not possible, right? So system call changes mode to kernel and returns from the call and resets it to the user. In that way, no, there will be continuous switching which will be done internally from the user mode to the kernel mode. Will get the privilege, will access the system calls and so on. Okay, so increasingly CPU support multi-mode operations also, which are normally the things which we normally see here nowadays. That is virtual machine manager for the VMs, different types of VMs. And now we can have multiple operating systems executing on the same platform, on the same hardware, in fact. Right. So if you want to have Linux also on that, Windows also on that, Mac OS also on the same machine, then obviously no, there are VMs modules which could be installed, and no, they will be using the same hardware. Now this VM, what is the role of this VM would be that it will look into the architecture. It will look into the architecture and will see that no, okay, your requirement is something different. The execution infrastructure is something different. So it will do that migration from the actual user mode requirement to the actual hardware requirement. So that will take away a lot of time, and at the same time it will also require a lot of main memory, right? So when you try to install virtual machines, no, it will always be delayed because no, that conversion would be required to be done. Okay, so this was the diagram for user mode to the user process to the kernel process. So mode bit is going to set and reset, and appropriately no, it will take the control. Okay. Any doubts? I've just given you the idea. Then we will once we are ending up this maybe half an hour more would be required to start the process management. Then we'll be jumping into the process management in detail. Okay. So till that point of time, this is just the basic understanding of where we require and what sort of things and the stuff behind the operating systems. The first chapter. Any doubts? Any doubts? If there are no doubts, just wait for some time. I request